Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. On September 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk, a champion of free speech and civil debate, was publicly assassinated on a college campus while engaging in conversation with a crowd of students. Kirk was widely recognized for being willing to talk with anyone, no matter what their point of view. Despite frequently being the target of vicious personal attacks, he always kept a cheerful, good-natured focus on ideas, turning them, testing them, stacking them against each other, and then making a case for what he took to be the strongest point of view. He welcomed anyone to challenge his conclusions and would, to his great credit, change his mind if a better argument emerged. But now he's dead, murdered, as Bishop Barron has put it, with a microphone in his hand. This evil act not only stole Kirk from his wife and children and the millions who loved and respected him, it also revealed a disturbing new cultural and political reality for those who share any of Kirk's views. It is possible in our day and age to be shot for speaking your mind. How can we recover from this dark event whose effects have reverberated across the globe? How can we reclaim the possibility of disagreement with each other without resorting to violence? What conditions must be in place to make civil debate both possible and productive again, especially as our society appears to be growing more and more polarized? Here to help illuminate a path forward is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, welcome back to the studio.
Thanks, Matt. Always good to be with you.
So today we're talking about something that, unfortunately, I wish we did not have to talk about, but we can't take it for granted anymore that we can't disagree civilly in society more without the threat of violence. So before we turn to that heavy topic, what have you been up to recently?
Well, one thing I mentioned with the 71 seminarians from IHM, so that's the junior seminary in my diocese. There's 71 guys studying for, I think it's 17 different dioceses. But twice a year we go down to the Planned Parenthood in Rochester, and we gather there to pray the rosary and various litanies and just to demonstrate against abortion. And it's always a joy to see all these guys, and a number of lay people come too. Yeah. And so we prayed together, and I think it just lifted up, the seminarians themselves. And I gave a little fervorino at the end to say, I know certain public officials want to denigrate prayer, but I said, when I was younger than you, I was coming to these things, and we never imagined it was possible that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. We never imagined it possible in our lifetime. But how did it happen? Well, partially, I'd say, through the power of prayer. So never underestimate that. And so we gathered with great fervor just the other day.
It's beautiful. And many clinics are closing down. It's happening in real time. So
thank God.
It's working.
Thank God.
Okay, so on to today's topic. Bishop, as you know, we're recording this episode fewer than 2 months from the date that Charlie Kirk was very publicly assassinated, which prompted you to write an article in First Things that you entitled, "He Died with a Microphone in His Hand." Before we get to the substance of your argument, though, tell us a little bit about your experience with Charlie Kirk and your impressions of his work.
Yeah, it wasn't extensive, my personal contact with him. I met him just once a couple years ago during the Good News Conference in Phoenix, and where he lives, and he reached out to me. At the time, I knew the name, but very little about him. Reached out to me and said, "Can we get together for breakfast?" So I said, "Sure." So I met him, and he was great. He was charming, intelligent, and we talked mostly about religion, about theology. He knew my work at the time, and we talked about God and Jesus and the Trinity, and so it was not so much politics; it was faith. So then after that, I learned more about him, and I stayed in touch with him occasionally, through email or through texting. And I also started watching him on YouTube. I'd see these, the way it goes on social media, you watch something, then other ones will pop up.
Right.
So I watched actually a number of these exchanges he had, usually at university campuses. And I just kind of admired his style, his technique and everything. And then he, especially after the second Trump election, he became much more of a national figure. And we reached out to him, and he was very happy. He agreed to come to this very room and to be interviewed. So I was looking forward to that. And just 2 nights before he died, I was in Washington and I was on one of these evening programs talking about the Religious Liberty Commission that I'm on. And I think Charlie was on either right after me or right before me on the same show, right? So then right afterwards, I got a text saying, saw you on the show, looking forward to Minnesota next week, Charlie Kirk. So that's the last contact I had with him, because 2 days later, I'm on an airplane flying home from Washington, and I see this guy across the aisle watching the news on his, on the screen. And I just happened to notice the name Charlie Kirk. And I thought, why is he in the news? You know? Then I turned on my own news and then watched it in kind of real time and discovered he had been shot and he died before I reached Minneapolis. Right. So it was just kind of a very sobering thing to know I had just been in touch with him, that he was coming here to be, with me in person, and then to see him assassinated was horrible.
What kind of questions were you going to ask him in your Bishop Barron Presents?
It's funny, I hadn't really finalized it. Typically, when someone comes in, they've written a book of some kind, or they've written books, and I usually use that as a point of reference. But I think what I was going to ask him about were these many, many videos that I'd seen of him. The one that got my attention too, that I remember texting him after this when I saw that format now where they have someone sitting in the middle and then like 20 people around you.
On Jubilee, yeah.
Yeah, well, his was, I think, with like 20 woke people or something. And God bless him. I mean, I watched this thing, and these kids, the combination of stupidity and obnoxiousness was so high.
A potent combination.
And so afterwards, I found his number, and I just said, Charlie, I watched you, and I infinitely admire your patience with these young people. So I was going to ask him about that sort of thing. Like, hey, what have you heard? What's gone wrong with a lot of our young people? What's wrong with the universities that's forming them in such a weird way? I was going to ask him, I think, what's the best argument you've heard against one of your positions? What's something that you had to kind of wrestle with? What's impressed you most as you talk to young people? What's depressed you the most? Probably things like that I was going to ask him. And then about the faith, because he was deeply interested in Christianity. I think it's fair to say in Catholicism too.
Right.
He was an evangelical Christian, but he loved the faith and loved ideas and theology. So we probably would have gotten around to that too.
And he very publicly shared that in his great meetings, encounters with students.
Yeah.
His faith in Jesus Christ.
Right.
Our son who's 18 and our daughter who's 15, they watched that Jubilee video of Charlie Kirk and watched his hundreds, if not thousands of other videos. His influence on young people was absolutely tremendous, including evangelically.
Yes, and that is extraordinary, and I get it. And Charlie, at least as I saw him in these university settings, was not histrionic. I mean, he would sit with a microphone, and people would come up to the microphone, and they would engage him. Occasionally, it would get like maybe a little heated, but typically he would, listen, and he would make a counter argument, and then the next person would come up, and it wasn't like he was a sort of rabble-rousing figure. It was more of a calm conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think I know it impacted people, and that he had the courage to go into pretty hostile settings. I mean, most universities now in our country would be pretty hostile to conservative ideas. But I think people admired his moxie. He just showed up and, okay, let's talk, And then that refrain, I think I put that in the article of his, that when people would say, what are you doing here? Why are you on our campus? And they'd say it usually in a hostile way. And his response was, when people stop talking, bad things happen. And one of the great ironies, of course, is that a very bad thing happened to him,
right,
even as he was talking to people that were opposed to him. But that, I think, was a very inspirational move for a lot of young people.
Let's now turn to the substance of your article, which again has the title, "He Died with a Microphone in His Hand." Bishop, you frame your approach to explaining really what's at the heart of the problem by appealing to Western civilization and its roots in Athens on the one hand and Jerusalem on the other. Say a little bit about what Athens represents and how you saw that in Charlie Kirk's work.
Right. So the title of the article, "He Died with a Microphone in His Hand," meaning not with a gun in his hand, not with a knife in his hand, not with a grenade in his hand, but with an instrument of communication. He wasn't engaging in a violent confrontation. He was inviting dialogue. And I identified that as something that's really fundamental to our Western civilization. I was trying to understand why his death and his manner of death was having such a convulsive effect on the society, because it was more than just, the tragic death of a young man, father of 2 kids and all that. True enough. But there was more to it. And what I put my finger on was this deep intuition that something in our Western manner of life was threatened. And it's this open public conversation moving toward greater articulation of the truth. We're in the same territory as our topic last week, John Henry Newman, right? That ideas unfold in the play of lively minds. Bad things happen when people stop talking, because then ideas get fixed and they stop developing. And our conversation is the condition for the possibility of healthy development of ideas. So Athens, the birthplace of philosophy in many ways, the paradigmatic figure there being Socrates. The Socrates, didn't really give lectures. He didn't go to a university and give talks. He didn't give a course in epistemology. What he did was he'd go to the streets, and often talking to young people. That reminded me too of Charlie Kirk. And he would ask questions. And he'd say, what is the beautiful? Or what is justice? And then he'd get an answer, and he'd say, that can't be right, can it? Because this and that. And then they would say something else, and he would clarify it further. And in this sort of conversational exchange, truth was clarified, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't a relativism like there is no truth. He was actually seeking the truth, but doing it through dialogue. His greatest disciple, Plato, writes not so much essays or lectures, but he writes dialogues that were literary versions of the Socratic conversations. Aristotle, Plato's greatest disciple, has a school called the Peripatetic school, because people walked around talking to each other. And I trace that then right all the way to, let's say, the tutor system in Cambridge and Oxford, where the learning takes place not primarily through lectures, but through a disciplined conversation between tutor and student. I also, mentioned my great hero, St. Thomas Aquinas. For Aquinas, how do you get to truth? Well, through what he called questiones disputate, disputed questions. I got a question. I want to hear your take on it. And now here's my answer to it. And here's how I'd respond to what you said about it. And that leads to the next question. And the process goes on of spirited public, indeed for Aquinas, public dialogue between conversation partners. That's deep in the Western, I think, tradition. Look at it in terms of politics, in the 18th century revolutions. What best governs society? Well, not so much commands coming from on high, but this disciplined conversation that we call the political process of debate and argument and election and balance of power, and Senate says this, but House says that, and compromise reached, and so on. It's deep in our, in other words, cultural DNA, that public conversation, nonviolent, in fact, it's an answer to violence. Because the instinct is, hey, I think this, you think that, I'm right, you're wrong, let's fight, I'll conquer you and silence you, right? Well, that primitive approach has been recognized from Socrates on, at least, as inimical to real truth-seeking, inimical to human flourishing, both epistemologically and politically. Now, maybe it sounds a little grandiose to put Charlie Kirk right in that company, but I'm just saying he represented that tradition, seems to me. And that's why murdering him while he was doing that was so repugnant to our sensibilities. And
as the article highlights, this is also part of the Christian and biblical tradition as well. It's not just the Western philosophical tradition.
And so Aquinas, would fit very much there. But also I mentioned, and I just, in this very room we had Rabbi Soloveitchik recently, and we talked a bit about that, is in Talmudic study or biblical study, again, not so much lectures on the Bible, but rather two people like this across from each other, the Bible in the middle or the Talmud, and now let's talk about it. And what's your question? And how would I answer that? And then what did Maimonides say about that many centuries ago? And what did Hillel say about that? And what did Gamaliel say about that? And so there's this dialogue across the ages. But again, in the lively play of conversation, truth is approached. And I do think Charlie, this young man, killed at 31.
31.
This young man, but he embraced that tradition in a way I think that was really beautiful.
Right, that's the great combination of Athens and Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So Bishop, you go on to argue that two basic assumptions are necessary for the dialogical method that define Charlie Kirk's approach to debate. And you identify those as one, the dignity of the human person, and two, the objectivity of truth. So let's start with the first one, the dignity of the human person. How are you conceiving of dignity in this context, and why is it a necessary condition?
Because I look at history, both ancient and then relatively recent history. There are tons of examples of people who say, the best way forward is, look, I got this figured out. Yeah. I'm right. There are a lot of other people that don't have it figured out. So what do? Well, let's first imprison them. Or let's first try to silence them. That doesn't work. Let's throw them in prison. That doesn't work. Let's kill them. And you say, oh, come on, that's maybe a long time ago. Give me a break. It's happened in my lifetime. It happened massively in my parents' lifetime, when precisely that move was made by people who did not believe in the dignity of the individual. So I'm talking obviously about Hitler and about Stalin and about Mao and about Pol Pot and about Fidel Castro and on and on and on. There are lots and lots of people that feel human beings are expendable. You want to make an omelet, crack a few eggs, as Lenin said. So if you don't believe in the dignity of the individual, you're not going to worry about conversation. You're going to just kill people or eliminate or silence people that disagree with you. It's pretty straightforward, and it kind of solves the problem. But if you believe in human dignity, which those who are grounded in the Bible do, well, then something like respectful conversation, a nonviolent, respectful conversation is a prerequisite, right? Mm-hmm. It's the only way you can do it. It's an answer to violence. When people see that this kind of conversation is the alternative to violence. If you're afraid of conversation, oh no, that's too dangerous. That's a bad perspective, because the alternative will be real violence. May I say, before I forget, I think one of the ugliest and unhappiest developments of wokeism, which I hate in general, but one of the worst is the view that language is violence. That is a very, very dangerous perspective to have.
Yes.
And I know it's fashionable to say, like, oh my gosh, what you say is so offensive to me, it's like violence. No, if we go down that path, real violence will follow.
That's right.
Because if your words have violated me in some ways, well, then I'm justified in shooting at you.
Right.
Right? You know, who knows, the trial will unfold about the young man that allegedly killed Charlie Kirk, but you know, what you hear is all right, I can't take it. His language is too offensive to me. God help us when we construe speech as violence. But we've been hearing that in the academy now for the past 50 years. But the irony to me is that is what's dangerous. That's what's violent, is to construe speech as violence. Once we do that, the American political experiment is out of the water too, right? Because it's predicated upon, that's why freedom of speech is so important to us. Even speech that I hate, even speech that's hurt my feelings, even speech I don't agree with, and is going to cause trouble for my emotional life. Well, get over it. Get over it, or our political system unravels, and in fact, you've opened the door to real violence. You get the impression I feel strongly about this, because that has been a very negative development in the course of my lifetime.
All right, real violence and state repression as well. That calling words violence gives license to the state to repress.
Freedom of speech is elemental to our epistemological system and our political system.
Let's then move to the objectivity of truth. What do you mean by the objectivity of truth? What makes it objective, and why is that a necessary condition?
It's the condition for the possibility of a real conversation and not a shouting match. Mm-hmm. So if truth is just a matter of, well, I got mine, you got yours, I'm not going to have a conversation with you. I'm just going to try to shout you down, right? But if I believe, no, truth is somehow out there, it exists objectively, and likely I've got some take on it, and likely you've got some take on it, it's probably advantageous to both of us to search it out and to do so within the framework of this objective set of conditions. What I mean is, let's say we're having an argument, and I say, no, what you just said, that can't be right. What am I appealing to? Not just my opinion. I'm appealing to something that we both can perceive as right. And I say, no, what you just said is further from that than what I'm saying, right? if the thing is going to work, we both have to accept the objectivity of truth. We have to accept the legitimacy of logic. We have to know that, marshaling evidence and drawing conclusions is a legitimate exercise. If it's not, and of course it's tragically common today, again, I'd say because of our universities, that truth is relative, it's all a matter of private opinion, it's just you're subjective and you're playing games of power. Hey, if that's true, then let's just get on with the games of power. Right. Let's just get on with it. And I'll do all I can to silence you or shout you down or use state power to coerce you or whatever. See, conversation breaks down when I think truth is merely relative or subjective. We think we're honoring people's freedom and individuality. We're not. We're undermining them.
Destroying them.
We're destroying them, right. And that's, again, one of the ironies of this sort of woke time that we're in.
I think it was the great philosopher Alistair MacIntyre who said, achieving disagreement is very hard to do.
Yeah.
And his point was that in order to disagree with each other, you actually have to agree on
Yes.
all of these premises that
On
you've
fundamentals.
just identified.
Well, it's like, Matt, it's like playing a game. So we're playing baseball, right? Well, so you say, hey, I think 2 strikes and you're out. Well, when do you can say that? You're not playing baseball anymore. I think when I get a hit, I can just run directly to second base. Well, no, man, you can't do that. You're not playing baseball anymore.
Right.
Once we accept the framework of baseball, there's a set of rules. Now, yes, play it creatively, and yes, with all your particular skills, and you're particularly good at this, and I'm good at that, but we're all playing baseball here. If I don't agree on the rules of baseball, and who are we imposing rules on me? Then we can't play anymore. Same with tennis or any game. Games, fun, right? We're playing, yes, but that play is predicated upon something serious, which is a common acceptance of the rules of the game. The same is true of conversation.
Could we apply this insight also to the marketplace of ideas? That it can only truly be a marketplace if there's kind of common currency.
Right. There's some shared framework of meaning. But see, that means you're appealing to something that's objectively intelligible, and that's where I'm going with the next part of the argument.
Right. So let's move there. You move even deeper. So you're looking, you identify human dignity and objective truth as necessary conditions, but then you look at the necessary condition for those,
right.
Which you identify as a belief in God. Explain how you make that move.
We'll try to justify human dignity apart from God. It's exceptionally difficult. God's out of the picture. There's no God, right? We're just the random result of evolutionary processes. We're just dumbly here the same way stars and animals dumbly emerged out of the primal chaos. Well, then where's human dignity come from? I mean, who needs it? And watch precisely those political and social arrangements that deny God's existence. That's exactly what happened. Is human beings became expendable. If God exists and God has made all of us indeed in his image and likeness, endowed with intelligence, will, freedom, and creativity, well, then we are subjects, as the church says, of dignitas infinita, of an infinite dignity. Take God out of the picture, I mean, you might appreciate certain qualities of certain human beings,
right.
But how about a human being that's annoying you, a human being that's malformed, a human being that is inconvenient to you? Well, they're expendable, Our throwaway culture, as Pope Francis called it, the culture of death, as John Paul II called it, that follows directly from a negation of God. But see, that's why this conversational model that's predicated upon human dignity is at least implicitly predicated upon a belief in God.
And how is the belief in God necessary for the objectivity of truth, that condition?
Because how do you explain objective intelligibility, whether it's in things like the pattern by which things exist or the objective intelligibility of a rational order that makes logic possible? How do you explain that apart from some great intelligence that has thought it into being? Dumbly there by the most impossible chance that the world in every nook and cranny is marked by intelligibility. It's incoherent, it seems to me, apart from belief in a creator God who has thought the world into being. Even the principles of logic, even like mathematical objects and so on, are very hard to explain apart from some intelligence in which they inhere. And we could develop that argument in a lot of different ways, but I think the framework for something like real conversation requires a creative intelligence that grounds it.
Mm-hmm. You further specify by drawing on Pope Benedict XVI that the conception of God needs to be specifically tied to understanding God as the priority of logos over will. Explain why that move is also important.
Well, that's the question of voluntarism. Go back to Ratzinger's famous Regensburg address. That was his main point. Voluntarism privileges will over intellect is a way to sum it up. Will is primordial. See, but if will is primordial, and for the voluntarist in God, I mean, the God's will kind of trumps his intellect. Things are true. Why? Because God wants them to be true. Okay? That's the voluntarist perspective. Now, transpose that into the human context. Will is greater than mind. Well, then, heck, if I can, I'm going to impose my will on you. Mm-hmm. Why are things true? Well, because it serves my desires, serves my purposes. Is it true objectively? Is it true in a way that constrains me? No. I mean, truth is a function of will. Now, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, through Nietzsche, Foucault, and company, have massively influenced the woke culture today. Mm-hmm. And that's the danger of it, is a voluntarism. Voluntarism undermines real conversation, see, because it precludes this rational framework we've been talking about and privileges power over truth. So you're bugging me, you're saying something I don't agree with, well, I'll just shut you up. Right. And I'll do it as violently as I can if I must, right? So that's the limit case of voluntarism that leads again to oppression and to violence.
So let's look at some possible counter-arguments. Let's say there's some in our audience, and this may indeed be the case, that affirm your claims that dignity and objective truth are necessary. But they say something along the following lines. Well, why can't we just sort of from a utilitarian or pragmatic perspective just say, well, society affirms these values, recognize, maybe even constitutionally, we don't need to get God involved. Or a classical liberal who says, well, yes, but we can get those same values from human autonomy alone and we don't need God. How would you respond to those counter-arguments?
Well, see what happens when we try to do that. It devolves very quickly into something very dangerous. And I would go back then to the 18th century, as I often do, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Mm-hmm. And the created matters immensely there. Where's our equality come from? We're not equal in any way that I know. And the line human beings up there, we're unequal by any measure. Yeah. How are we equal then? Where's it come from? Right. And Jefferson's right. We're created equal. We're equally children of God, right? Endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Where do rights come from? Well, in both classical and modern forms, they come from the will of the powerful. They come from an elite. They'll be granted to some and not to others. Where do universal rights come from? Why should that be true? That every human being is endowed inalienably with rights? Well, because of God. If God is not in the picture, that means something else is giving you those rights. And typically it's government or it's some kind of cultural consensus. Well, when the government changes or the cultural consensus mutates, the rights will disappear. Have you seen it? Everywhere where God is systematically denied. Rights follow, the elimination of rights follows right behind. So no, I have little patience with that argument. I think it's a very dangerous path to go down. Now, if someone's willing to say, look, I accept human dignity and intelligible context, okay, I'll take that over wokeism any day. But it's sort of like the cut flowers theory, right? Yeah, right. You've cut that out of the ground where it's coming from, and it's not going to last.
We've seen it play out in real time.
Yeah.
So, Bishop, stated positively and in a nutshell, what is the Catholic case, both from a biblical and natural law perspective, for freedom of speech and a right to speak your mind without fear of either government reprisal or fear of violence from others?
Human dignity that's grounded in creation. And that's, I'm on this Religious Liberty Commission, and that is the Catholic way to talk about it, is it comes from our dignity. Why should I be free when it comes to religion? You make all kinds of arguments for it. It's not good. There should be, Thomas Hobbes says there should be one religion, the one imposed by the sovereign. And I get it. He lived during the wars of religion, and people were fighting like mad over this stuff. So Hobbes said, all right, let's settle this thing. Whatever the king is, that's your religion. All right. Well, okay, it solves one problem, but creates enormous problems because now the deepest sanctuary of my conscience is violated. What's most sacred to me as a free individual is violated because now I'm being dictated to and coerced in these matters. So Catholic teaching, because of human dignity, grounded in creation, holds to religious liberty.
So you end your article on a very sobering, even frightening note, recognizing that not only do we have the assassination of Kirk, we have, as you describe it, this plethora of videos that comes out in the wake celebrating it. And as you put it, not from the fevered corners, but from mainstream, we could call them professionals.
See, yes, it's what bugged me the most about it. Poor Charlie, and then these obnoxious people, and I'm not going to hold back, these repugnant, repellent people that were celebrating his death. Look, I get it. If you don't agree with him, great, fine. It's a free country. I get it. Did Charlie always say everything in the most politic way? Probably not. He died at 31. If I thought everything young. I said when I was 25 or 26 is going to be so. But, was he a racist and misogynist? Absolutely not. Anyone that watched the totality of his work and all that. But fine, disagree with the man if you want to. But this rejoicing, see, and to me, that speaks to the problem with the culture we're in. It speaks to a voluntarist culture. It speaks to this us against them, who's got more power. Hey, someone on the wrong team, okay, got eliminated, great. But see, we've lost our humanity, any sense of human dignity, or even any sense of a common framework of meaning. You don't like Charlie Kirk's view? Well, argue with him. Give him a counter argument. But rejoicing like barbarians in his death, and as I say in the article, and you highlight there's always people in the fever swamps of any culture. Okay, I'm sure like when JFK was killed, there were some weirdos that were rejoicing in it. But you didn't see that in 1963 in our culture. You didn't see people rejoicing. Something has gone seriously wrong with the culture when that happens, and the fact that they were teachers and university professors and government officials and people in responsible walks of life. So there's a rot in our culture that was manifested to me vividly in that dynamic, and it's disturbing and well worth our attention. I think as people that watch the culture and try to monitor it. My own view is it's a very ugly symptom of the collapse of religion. And we've been watching the disaffiliation from the churches for a long time. When people come of age, no God, no purpose, no moral absolute, I come from nothing, go nowhere, I've accepted the Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens view of the universe, then why not just rejoice in the murder of someone that I disagree with intellectually? Something is rotten in the state of America if that's the case. And so I think we should pay a lot of attention to that.
You also note the very startling statistic that 1 in 3 college students openly say in surveys that they think that violence is sometimes justified in response to a campus speech.
To a speech.
See, that's how the question was worded.
I've been speaking as a religious person, but as an American, as someone that reverences Abraham Lincoln and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy, that is gross and repugnant and very dangerous. But see, it's been propagated in our institutions, unfortunately, precisely that view. If someone says something I don't like, I'm justified in using violence. Bring Madison and Jefferson and Ben Franklin and John Adams into the room. But what would they say about that?
Different
our
country.
whole system is predicated upon the opposite of that. But see, it's the invasion of, and I've talked about it before, wokeism is continental critical theory expressed in popular terms. And that's a poisonous farrago of ideas. And it's found its way into our institutions. And you see it precisely in that nonsense.
So a very practical question, Bishop. How do we, as a society, engage in dialogue with, debate with those who reject on principle the conditions that are necessary to engage in dialogue and debate?
It's hard. And the only way to do it is to model it, it seems to me. And that's where, Charlie becoming a kind of martyr to this truth. But you have to model it. You have to have the courage to do it. And see, the thing is, I think he did have a big impact on a lot of young people who were raised in this poisonous atmosphere of wokeism. But I think he was modeling a way to do it, and they were responding in great numbers, increasing numbers. So I take great hope in that. You have to have the courage to do it. Look at Socrates. The first person I mentioned is killed by the coercive state, right? That in some ways our Western intellectual tradition begins with this problem. Someone who's trying this but is opposed by nefarious forces. Mm-hmm. So it's an old story. This is a very old story. But I think you need people with the courage of a Socrates to go into the public forum.
Bishop, as you know, Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, shocked the world when in front of millions of people, both who were there in the stadium and online watching, including me in real time, when she forgave the killer. Right. So as we move to a conclusion, help us to understand how forgiveness is possible and good while also having a just desire for justice for the killer.
Yeah, well, it's grace is the answer. That's the short answer. It's a manifestation of grace. And I was there at that service, and right. I saw it directly and heard her. And it was one of the most powerful expressions of the gospel that I've experienced in my lifetime. To hear someone, whose husband has been brutally murdered.
Days after, with 2 little children, and to pronounce forgiveness of her enemies, as Jesus calls us to do. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever seen a more vivid display of the gospel. Now, it's different, as you suggest. I mean, you still seek justice for the person that killed Charlie, and that's a separate issue. But the forgiveness she manifested is, I think, only explicable through grace, and therefore it's a manifestation of grace. And it was, extremely powerful to see. So ending on a positive note, what are some lessons you think Charlie Kirk's life offers us as evangelists in particular, and what should we carry on from his legacy?
Well, I just reverence the fact that very often in these public forums where he was talking about politics for the most part, but he almost always found a way to declare his faith. And he did it in a very non-apologetic way, just a very straightforward way. And when he was talking to some of these lost boys and lost girls, and he would just witness, look, my life was changed by Jesus, and it changed me in a positive way, and everything's gotten better in my life, and urge you to do that too, and get married, have more kids than you can afford, give yourself to some profession, that you can enter into with passion, and love God and love neighbor, and good. I mean, there he was, I think, a great evangelical presence.
It's now time for our listener question, Bishop. Today we have Dan from Texas asking for advice on a healthy way to end an argument when it's become clear you're just at an impasse.
Yeah.
Hi, Bishop Barron. It's Dan from Texas. I was calling to see if you might provide some practical advice for ending an argument, even one of those healthy ones that you kind of talk about our culture haven't forgotten about. When it's clear that you're right and the facts and the principles are on your side and you've explained yourself clearly and in a spirit of love, but it's also clear that the other party won't budge. How do you convince yourself to step away? Like, what practical steps besides just praying for patience and humility are there? Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. I think you've seen it in a way, like, because you articulated that very well, that when you come to that moment where you say, okay, we're not getting anywhere. I've made my case. I've done it respectfully. I'm pretty sure I've got the better of this argument. And probably the emotional level is rising. That's kind of a Newman thing too. And we can distill out the sheerly rational side of a conversation, but then you also realize these non-rational elements are playing a role. And okay, his temper is now rising in a way that is going to just obviate this thing. That at that point it's probably best, as you suggest, to just step away and say, I've done what I can. Or maybe an invitation to talk again. Why don't we come back and revisit some of this? Or another move is to affirm something good and right in what the person said. Hey, look, we got to bring this to a close, but when you said X and Y, I thought those were really good points. But let's come back and finish it later, something like that. But when you sense, all right, this is going to move now into a negative territory, it is probably best just to step away.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question on a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. Again, that's askbishopbarron.com. We always love to hear from you. Well, thank you, Bishop, as always.
God bless you, Matt. Thanks.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.